April 3rd, 1996, Principles of the Infinite Way, class number 10. Good evening, everybody. I think we're about 3/4 done with this class. Everything's in place now. We will just talk about supply and about healing, and then we'll spend 1 week reviewing the principles. I've sort of pulled the principles that have been brought up in all these classes together. Supply, I think, is probably the favorite Infinite Way topic, and there certainly are several of you here tonight who are right in the middle of sorting out supply issues, and if we've understood the previous classes, we're all in a position to understand this and begin doing the work. Supply is the nature of supply is an immediate consequence of the nature of God and the nature of man and the nature of error and the nature of the mind. And the problem most people have with supply is that when I say supply, they think of money. And money is not supply. Money is the outpicturing of supply. As with everything else, we have two levels to deal with here again. We have 3D and 4D. Material supply is the outpicturing of spiritual supply, and material supply is what we're all used to dealing with, and it's what we all think of when we talk about supply, and when we all think we're practicing the principles of spiritual supply, we're really practicing the principles of material supply. And the material world is limited, and these are the things that come and go. We start out thinking that supply is the result of our own sweat and effort, because that's world mind's understanding of supply, that I have to go out and get mine, take care of myself. And that's what happens when we're totally in the material world without any higher consciousness at all. But then we get elevated to the mental level, the level at which metaphysics operates. And here we begin to have a better success with supply. We begin to learn certain things like that if you want to, we learn about tithing, let's say. We learn about giving in order to receive. We learn about affirmations. We learn that we can use our minds to create. We know that we learn that we can affirm certain truths about supply and that it may materialize. We learn about karma. As you sow, so shall you reap. And so we learn that if we sow good, we'll get more good back, and if we share, we'll get more back. We learn the principle of tithing. Tithing is the principle of giving the first 10% of what you earn to the world for spiritual purposes, and we learn that if we tithe, that there then is some return from that, and we get into a material sense of tithing so that we will receive, and we get into the sense of putting money out so that we receive, and it really does work at a certain level. It certainly is true that in the 3D world, the karmic law is true, and mind is the power, and all these things do have a certain amount of power, and they do work to a certain level. The problem is that I am doing it. 3D I am doing it with my mind, and whatever I do with my mind, a stronger mind can do it, or those things which I am not doing with my mind don't get done. If I'm working on supply and forget my health, then I get sick, or if I'm working on one particular aspect of supply, another aspect doesn't come through, or it's a juggling act. It's a much more sophisticated juggling act, but it is a juggling act. Chogyam Trungpa has a wonderful book on spiritual materialism, and the point of that is exactly this: that as we get higher, as we become more aware, I won't say higher, as we become more aware of how things work, or at least how things don't work, we become more sophisticated, and we start relying on spiritual things to get what we want instead of relying on material things to get what we want. And this is spiritual materialism. And although in general this works better, and in general our humanhood will be improved, there's lots of you here who have demonstrated sharing and receiving things from another corner, and have demonstrated oneness in this sense. But it's not it. It can always disappear. And Margaret says, and Joel says it about healing, and Margaret also says it about supply, that there is a built-in safety factor. You can go to a spiritual healer and get healed so many times, and eventually it will stop working. And the reason for this is not that the consciousness of the practitioner is any less. The reason for this is that at some point you are thrown on your own and you must do it for yourself. Jesus said, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come. And what that means is, as long as I'm here doing your work for you, you're not going to do it yourself. And that is a built-in safety factor as far as going to your practitioner for healing. And I've heard Joel say that, and Margaret says that's also true for supply. At some point, doing it yourself must stop working, because the nature of this universe is for you to grow spiritually. And we move on spiritually when what we're doing doesn't work. We slowly must discover the errors of our erroneous thinking. And so, at some point, all these material and mental metaphysical efforts at supply must fail. You can be quite successful for years at tithing and then go broke and wonder what happened. You can be doing all these things, sharing and doing all these appropriate gifts that we have, giving to the poor, giving to goodwill, doing all the things we do. And at some point, you keep coming up against a wall. This fails or that fails, or I'm back on the ropes again, or there's not enough, or whatever. And this is always because during this whole process we're thinking of supply as the things that we need, the car or the house or the money or the parking place or whatever. What must be realized, and it comes out of the lesson on the mind especially, is that whatever is created in your mind can be destroyed. Whatever you don't pay attention to in your mind goes away. What you are creating with your mind, you are maintaining, and if you withdraw your attention from it, it will disappear. Or if a stronger mind than yours comes along, it can disappear it. Or certainly any mind in touch with God can disappear it. A spiritual mind will certainly see the truth. And if the truth is that your supply is a lie, that will not happen. So we can see why that doesn't have any real solidity to it. It's all entirely done from the intellect, from a consciousness which is in the intellect creating and the mind forming, and this materiality that has no reality is there, and that is not what we're looking for. Real supply is, Margaret uses the word discernment, and Joel uses that word too, and the word discernment really means realization. Discernment is the spiritual equivalent of the intellectual understanding. Discernment is the recognition or the knowing or the grokking. If you remember A Stranger in a Strange Land, discernment is the intuitive, the knowing, the fourth dimensional knowing. And all supply is discernment of a spiritual principle, of spiritual truth. Supply is the discernment of the truth that I am, for the I am, that I have, that all that the Father has is mine, that I and my Father are one. It is that knowing of oneness. It is that intuitive grasping of it, and if we remember from the mind, when you are intuitively knowing a spiritual truth, that spiritual truth then immediately impacts the mind, and the mind must express, and what it must form. And what the mind forms is, if it's in this path, then the mind forms that which the intellect will subsequently interpret as supply. What the mind forms is my allness, my havingness, my oneness. And that is the supply. The form is not the supply. The form is the outpicturing of the supply. The form is the 3D mental sensory interpretation of supply, but supply is that spiritual oneness with God impacting the mind. And that's the end of the class. That's all there is to it. We can talk about it now. I've just got a million gems here that have come out of various things I've been reading and listening to over the past several weeks. But that really is supply. Supply is spiritual oneness with God. God is harmony. God is allness. When we are in oneness with God, everything that is necessary for us is there, and we are spiritual beings. We are in this harmonious world. Everything that we require is there. It must form. I mean, the nature of the translation into 3D is that it must form in the 3D world. And your intellect will interpret it as what you need. So the secret to supply is keeping your consciousness stayed on your oneness with God. And that's the exercise, that's the practice. I am not going to stop the class here. I'm going to worry this for the next 45 minutes. But the secret to supply is letting the recognition, the knowing, the discernment of your oneness with God be true for you, and this will impact the mind, and this will result in expression in the 3D world. And this supply is God, is infinite, can be multiplied. It's not like the 3D supply that is being created and maintained by you. This supply does not require your attention. Your attention is not on the supply. Your attention is not on the forms out there. You don't have to worry about them at all. What you do is know your oneness with God and that your needs are met, and observe the outpicturing of it. When I quit my job last July, I knew that I had the consciousness that I could afford to do that, because there was never a second in which I was not absolutely certain that there was work for me to do and that I would be given everything I needed to do it. And that is the supply consciousness. It had nothing to do with whether I would get to keep the house or pay the house or what I would be doing or anything like that. What I knew was that I was willing to do whatever work God gave me to do. I knew that there was work for me to do. I knew that God would give me everything I needed to do it. I knew that it would be in a manner, give me everything in a manner that would provide a harmonious life for me. And that has never, there's never been a ripple about that in my mind. And that is a supply consciousness. And here we sit 10 months later. And so far, so good. And that's what we're talking about.
The development of the middle concept, that's not a necessary step to developing the spiritual concept. That it's just something that people sometimes go to.
That's the second stage that people get to. People start with the material consciousness. The next level that they rise to is the mental level. The next level that they rise to is the spiritual level. It's not necessary work. It is not homework or anything like that. It's just a stage we go through. Like childhood is where you go through from babyhood to adulthood.
So there's nothing wrong with trying to develop the things that, like you mentioned affirmations. Is that something that you recommend working on?
No.
No, yeah.
It is not. That's mental work. I do not recommend doing any mental work at all. I recommend meditating and trying to achieve discernment of your oneness with God. And I recommend, as far as mental work, not doing mental work to try to create things, but just doing the necessary reading and listening to tapes and doing things like that to retrain your intellect, which will improve your chances of having that moment where the intellect is quiet and you do, in fact, discern your oneness with God.
It's almost mental work, though, too, because I know a lot about mental work, which has been really a big part of the process that I've gone through, is about discerning between what's true and what's false. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
most people's problems, largely, I think, a lot of them depend upon false information that they're continuously telling themselves. And it seems like...
Sure, it's important that the work you do to retrain the intellect be valid spiritual truth.
Right.
And the valid use, the original and valid use of the intellect is for discernment. Right. And that's the process. But unless you're one of these people who happens to get yanked into this fourth dimensional consciousness, usually it's necessary to retrain the intellect to some extent. And so, the process is that spiritual supply is the spiritual discernment of spiritual principle. And the principle is I am, I have. The mind's role is that consciousness creates, as we said, and mind forms, and the intellect interprets whatever mind forms as whatever our human need appears to be. That's the role of the mind in supply. Our consciousness of our oneness with God results in the God consciousness being the creator. and this is the true creator. Nonetheless, it impacts mind, the one mind, and the mind forms. Yeah. I guess there's nothing we need to say about that. The mind forms, and then the intellect interprets the form. It's not like the mind forms something that, it's not like the mind really forms a material object out there. It's not a material object. It's an object in consciousness, an object in the mind. And what it forms is seen by you according to your intellect. Margaret gives a wonderful example. Joan of Arc was asked by the Inquisition when God talked to her, and laughingly they asked her, well, what language does God speak? And she said, I don't know what language he speaks. I hear him in French. And another person who was German sitting next to her would hear him in German, and another one would hear him in English. And this is the intellect interpreting the spiritual reality according to your intellect. Similarly, if you need clothes and you're a girl, you'll likely get a dress, and if you're a guy, you'll likely get a pair of pants or something like that. I mean, the forming of the supply in the 3D world is determined by your intellect. And this is important to know when we get a little more into it, because, it will become obvious in a minute. But that's the role of the intellect. And as our intellect is clouded, we see cloudy pictures. We also can misinterpret as our intellect has bad information in it. But even if our intellect is clear, if our intellect is essentially quiet, if this intuition goes through the mind, it forms, and we read it back in without an intellect that is busy thinking about good and evil and right and wrong and all that sort of stuff. Nonetheless, it still is the tool which interprets the formation in mind and which recognizes it as what meets our requirement. Okay, so we wind up in a position of flow, or we would like to wind up in a position where we're in the flow of supply. The things that Jesus the Master said are, I and my Father are one. That's the basic rule. All that the Father has is mine. All that I have is thine. Is God speaking, and that's a direct outflow from the fact that I and my Father are one, back to the funnel picture and the spout. The spout is connected to the infinity of the Father, and there is no separation. Jesus said, take no thought for tomorrow, what you shall eat or what you shall drink or what you shall put on. He's really saying take no thought. He's saying get out of your intellect. And he means take no thought. Silence. Take no thought out of the intellect. In that silence, the flow will happen, and what you need tomorrow, what you need to eat and drink and put on, will manifest. He's telling you exactly the principle of the supply there. Your Father knows that you have need of these things. Actually, you know. Your intellect knows. You know the requirement. The fact is that the flow is omnipresent. It's always there. All you have to do is let it flow and recognize it. It's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Just more of the same. What this is saying is that supply must come through you. It doesn't come from out there to me. I and my Father are one. I have the mind. It forms through me. My supply comes through me. And my intellect interprets it. It must come through me. It can't come from anywhere else. People can't do it for you. whatever it is that I'm looking for, I must be the instrument through which it flows. Now, it may appear that that our supply comes from our work or from other people or something. I mean, that's the appearance. But the supply that we have is the direct consequence, the immediate consequence of the function of our spiritual sense of supply impacting our mind and forming in the 3D world. And then our intellect interprets it again according to the ways it can, and it always appears that it comes from somewhere. I mean, it does not generally appear that gold doesn't materialize on the floor. But it could, if that were what would be necessary. If that were the only way it could happen, it could happen. There are many cases of miraculous appearances of what was necessary to meet the situation, and that could happen. But in general, supply seems to happen through the normal situation, but it seems to happen with such coincidence and such regularity and in the perfect amounts that the signature is there. And he says, whenever I need money, I just pray for it. And he says, and God generally gives it to me. He says, usually on payday. But that's a consciousness of supply. That statement is a very good statement, and that's a consciousness of supply. And there's a lot of wisdom in there. The usually on payday shows a lot of wisdom.
So how do you know for sure what the difference is? Like if you're in the consciousness of supply, you're not concerned or agitated, or you're just relaxed about it. How do you know for sure?
Let's see if that flows out from here. Yeah, essentially that's right. I mean, if you're doing it, then you're not letting God do it. If you think you have to take care of it, then you're taking care of it. I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. And only you can really know that, and you can tell by going inside and checking the center of you. I mean, are you going to work to be of service, or are you going to work to get money? Type thing. Okay, whatever I'm looking for, I must be the instrument through which it flows, and there is no out there. All there is within me. It must come from within me, because there is no out there. All there is within me. And there's a basic fundamental of supply. All there is within me. The flow happens when I and my Father are consciously one. This is a conscious act. I and my Father are always one. It's always been true, it always will be true. But when I am consciously one with God, the flow happens. The flow will appear as the right job or the right house or the right amount of money or the right whatever it is that I need. That's as translated by my intellect. If you are in that spiritual consciousness, then you can drop all concern. That is the state of thy grace is my sufficiency in all things. Always grace is the consciousness of oneness with God, is supply, they're all synonymous. Conscious union with God is supply, is grace, is harmony, is love, is all one word. We just have different names for it depending on the function that we see it as, that it appears to us to be performing at a given time. Now, I listed some things that came up concerning the practicing supply. And the first one is really the fundamental one. I am a state of consciousness which is realized supply. So I am supply. I must stand on that, and then the mind must form.
Could you read that again?
Sure. We work on our state of consciousness. Okay, that's the work. That's the only work that has anything to do with supply. The work we do is work on our consciousness, meditation. This practice of supply is the knowing that I am a state of consciousness which has realized supply. So I am supply. I must stand on that, and then the mind must form. Mind must form immediately, instantaneously, what is in consciousness. The mind cannot delay, cannot postpone, has no choice, is a tool, like a hammer. And the consciousness is I am, I have. Now the next thing in the practice, the next thing in the consciousness that needs to be developed is to expect it. If you're not expecting it, that's a denial of the consciousness. I expected that my needs would be met in the style to which they need to be met in order for me to live harmoniously, because that's the nature of God. I expect that. So we expect it, and it's very possible to expect it in areas and not expect it in other areas, and therefore realize it in the areas you expect it in and not realize it in areas you don't expect it in. It's possible to expect parking places but not expect your rent to get paid, because parking places are trivial, I guess, for God, and rent is much more complicated. And the fact is that all we're really saying is it is more difficult for me to figure out how God's going to pay the rent or how this rent is going to get paid than it is for me to figure out how to get a parking place. I mean, a parking place is pretty easy. I just go to the spot and look, and there's a parking place in front of it, and it's pretty easy. Somebody just left, or, it's pretty easy for me to conceive of ways that this parking place would get there. But, the manner in which God's going to pay the rent, I don't have an aunt that's going to die and leave me to, it's harder for me to think of how the rent is, so I expect the parking place and I don't expect the rent, for example. And so by not expecting it, you are putting a limitation on it. We bring it forth when we expect it. So the principle really is I am, I have, I expect. And here's the point about the intellect. You must know what your requirements are. You can't expect things that you don't know you need. Your intellect is that which is interpreting supply as your needs. And if you need $1,000 and think you need $100 and discover $100 showing up, don't be surprised. Your intellect is interpreting infinite supply as what you need, and it's showing $100. And in fact, it's important that you know what your requirements are. Do the math, figure out what your requirements are, know what's going on. But don't outline. By outlining, I mean specify the way in which it should be met, or how it should be done. I could insist that the rent on this house gets paid by doing shiatsu. I took the shiatsu class, and now I'm a certified shiatsu therapist, and I could outline for God, well, I did the footwork, I've learned shiatsu, send me 50 customers a week so I can pay the rent. And that doesn't work. To the extent that I try to outline how it should be done, I'm limiting the manner in which it can be done, because again, it's my intellect that's now saying how it wants to express this, and my intellect, may have a lot of trouble conceiving of that. The fact is that this rent is not getting paid by my shiatsu. So it's important, by outlining you're limiting, I think of it as limiting God's options. And you leave it wide open. What you do is you recognize what your requirements are and wait to see how they will be met.
How can you tell, is there like a signpost that enables us to tell when we're crossing that line between knowing our requirements and writing an outline for... I'm a little gray there.
The requirements are what you need.
But based on...
The outline is how it will be fulfilled, how it will be met. They're very different things. Are you trying to ask a different question about the difference between needing and wanting?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I'm trying to get... How do you get clear on what your requirements are, as opposed to your wildest fantasies about what you want?
Well, I guess you will find out what your requirements are by seeing which ones need to be met, but you need to know what it takes to meet them. I mean, you know what your wildest fantasies are. You recognize that. If you're having a question with knowing what you need, I mean, my answer with respect to quitting my job was, I know God has work for me to do, and I know He will give me everything I need to do it. I don't know if that includes this house. This house may be the stage on which I do that work, or it may be an encumbrance. I may need to move, someplace else and do the work. I have no idea what the work is, so I don't know where I'll have to be. This house may be an encumbrance. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. What my need is to, eat and have a place to live and be warm and clothed and things like that, and I expect that. I don't think that I need to live in this house, or I don't think I need to take a break from it all this summer and go to Europe. These are not my needs. If I needed to go to Europe, I would expect that what was necessary to get there would arise. If I felt, when I went to India, it was because I had to go to India. I was called to India. And then everything happened that was necessary. A visa that usually takes 3 months to get showed up in about 2 weeks. My passport was done in 3 days. Everything that needed to happen happened miraculously. So that 2 weeks from the decision to go to India, from the moment that I recognized that I needed to go to India and began to attempt to get the visa and the passport, it was all done in 2 weeks, because my plane left in 3 or 4 weeks. And it wasn't realistic to expect that to happen then, but it just happened trivially. Everything I needed to sell was sold. I had enough money, and off I went. That was needs being met, because I was supposed to be there, and I knew that. Margaret says, if you really think you need a vacation, and you have your heart set on going to Europe, and somebody offers you a free month in Hawaii, don't insist on Europe.
Yeah.
Go to Hawaii.
Can I have a question about the intellect too? Is the final goal...
Can your intellect ask a question about the intellect?
What?
Can your intellect ask a question about the intellect?
Is the final goal of retraining the intellect to have it just be clear? I really got, when you were talking about the intellect interpreting and that interpreting the mind, that even if you...
We did this in the last 2 or 3 classes, and I'll do it with you separately again after the class, okay?
Okay.
I'll be glad to go over that with you, but that's not what this topic is, and we did go over that. It's on the tapes in the previous material, and I'll do it with you after the class, so tomorrow. We're talking about the practice. The quote from Jesus is, "Seek ye the Spirit, and the rest will be added unto you." And the quote from AA is, "Take care of your spiritual condition, and the rest will take care of itself." Those are equivalent, and that's a statement of get a consciousness of God, which is a consciousness of supply, which is a consciousness of harmony. So, I mean, it's one of the foundations of AA. Now, you're on the right track. Maybe this is to what you were asking, Joanne. You're on the right track when you're seeking spiritual contact, when you're not trying to demonstrate anything, when you're not trying to use God power to change anything, and when you're not trying to improve your or anyone else's humanhood.
Can you say that again?
I'd love to. It's really quite clear. You're on the right track when you are seeking spiritual contact only, I might add in parentheses. When you are not trying to demonstrate anything, not trying to use God power to change anything, not trying to improve your or anyone's humanhood. Take care of your spiritual condition, and the rest will take care of you. Seek ye the Spirit, and the rest will be added unto you. You're on the right track when you're focused on your oneness with God. You're trying to have that discernment, which is supply.
What would be a couple examples of trying to improve humanhood?
Any of the mental things, praying for people, or trying to, through affirmations, heal them, or praying for a God out there to heal them, or any of those types of things.
So
taking mental or material actions with the intent of improving humanhood rather than being a service.
Which would be assisting them in a way that you thought might facilitate an inner shift? I heard the words. Rather than an outer change, helping them in any way that you could, encouraging them in any way that they could to be connecting with God consciousness.
Teaching them, sharing consciousness with them, that's a different thing. But trying to fix their humanhood means dealing with the material world, you know. And this does not mean don't give a beggar a coat or something. I mean, also don't pass. I mean, you have to pay attention to this. You do not want to ignore humanity. You do not want to not give and not share in the material world. You must be giving things to people and such like, because if I don't give you something, I'm not giving it to me. If I do give you something, I'm giving it to me. There's oneness. It's the principle that's involved here. That will come up when I read about spiritual tithing.
So it wouldn't qualify as like talking to somebody about how to make amends?
Sure. It's wonderful.
Okay. So, I mean, that wouldn't qualify as changing their humanhood. Because you're...
No, that's improving their spiritual. That's growing their consciousness.
Trying to help them improve their humanhood would be like to encourage them to go get a better, higher paying job. Something like that.
They're talking about praying for a better car. Or praying that their tumor goes away. Or, using mental power to do it. Or tithing in order to get money. Or, doing any of these things in order that you'll get the necessary cash to go to Europe, or trying to improve your humanhood.
it's not working?
Yeah.
It all sounds like manipulation.
Well,
Doing something to get something out.
if you're manipulating, but I mean, it depends on whether you include, mental work as manipulation, affirmations as manipulation, things like that as manipulation. I mean, it's not limited to trying to manipulate God to doing things for you. Any sort of manipulation, any sense of doing it yourself.
Even visualizing a tumor shrinking
Is mental. Is mental. For you sales types, this one came through. You can't sell truth, you can only give it. You can give truth, you can give service, you can give love, you can give guidance. The reflex action of that is sales. So here's the case where you go out. Huh? I'm sorry?
Attraction rather than promotion.
Yes. So you go out and you provide a service. Lovingly. And the result is sales. And Margaret also says, don't try for specifics, go for the whole thing. And what she means by that is, don't deal on the material level, don't try to get a job, go for God consciousness. And solve the problem. Solve the entire problem. Get in the flow. I mean, if you get a job, then you're going to need another job or a car. And if you get the car, you'll need food. If you go for specific things, you're limiting the whole thing. If you go for consciousness of your oneness with God, then you are supply. And supply is no longer an issue. There's not a question of job, car, food. Now, I lumped under spiritual tithing all the ideas that were the things that I've run across have been given concerning making gifts, giving of ourselves, giving of our money, giving the 10%, all that sort of thing, because at the start I talked about material tithing and how it doesn't work. Nonetheless, tithing is exactly the right thing to do. But here we get a sense of where it has to come from. Tithing is not giving because of some need. It's not giving because of your need to give so that you'll get. And it's not giving because of the need of the person you're giving to. It's just giving because I have, which is the nature of my spiritual activity. I am supply, the nature of me is giving. That is the place from which tithing should come.
The tape I just listened to, he talked about this, about tithing. Pretty good section on it. Was that, once again, not from need, but giving the 10% because of the realization that I don't need
everything I have.
I don't. Yeah,
right.
You heard that
yeah.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Great.
but I don't need it. I don't need everything I don't know if that was the term, but basically, I have everything I need.
The third point is tithing spiritually is done entirely outside the sense of little I. It is from all that the Father has is mine. I mean, why not? It's a demonstration of... You see, it's not a demonstration of having things. It's a demonstration of spiritual consciousness. If you think you're doing something, you're denying your own godhood. I like that one. If you think you're doing it, you're limiting your return, because now all you can get back is that which reflects what you're doing. So you're limiting your return. Without the realization of the spiritual truth, your act does not have the force to return to you your own. This is from the Joel's people are into this casting your bread upon the water and it will come back to you. You'll get back your own. And I'm going to just leave that one out of here for now because I'm not really into ecclesiastics and that's not my terminology. We tithe from spiritual motivation. It is infinite. My supply is infinite. I can freely give and freely receive. I can give all. I don't have to worry about it coming back. It's infinite. We do share material things, but these are the outpicturing of spiritual supply. The essence of the whole thing is spontaneous spiritual sharing. Spontaneous is a very important word. That's the word of the Buddhas. Everything is done spontaneously. You spontaneously share. It's not calculated or thought about or determined or figured out. What happens is the situation is there, and I am, and I have, and I can, and I do. And it happens. And that's all there is. Mm-hmm.
I like when Rashneesh says that if you should go through your day or your week or your month saying yes to everything. Mm-hmm. Is that the same principle?
Partly. I mean, there's also the other side of that. For most people, they have the habit of automatically saying no to everything. He's not necessarily talking about tithing and sharing. He's talking about people saying, hey, do you want to go have dinner? And most people say no, and sometimes correct that to yes. And I heard Rajneesh say that 15 years ago, and I started saying yes and occasionally correcting to no, and the world opens up. I mean, it's just so many things that you just never do because you instinctively say no, or you never get because you instinctively say no, or you never learn.
No is a withholding.
It's a withholding, and it's a locking out and a locking in. It's a wall. Yeah. Certainly, if you say yes to everything, it will include spontaneously tithing. It should be a no-thought thing. And of course, I have. I can. I do.
Unless you're trying to be discerning and hang out with people who know the truth.
Well, but I can hang out with anybody and elevate them, can't I, if I know the truth? They're me. There is nobody else. There is no one who is not me.
So why would you say hang out with people who know the truth?
That's when you're not in this consciousness. That's how you get into this consciousness, because when you hang out with people that know the truth, you get elevated into the consciousness. When you are coming from this consciousness, there is no one else. As your capacity to give increases, so does your capacity to receive. Now, when we share spiritual things, it's easy. When we share material things, usually it's when the glitch goes off in your mind. And Margaret suggests that every time you write a check, express gratitude that I can, I have. Reaffirm the consciousness. Write the check, and write it gratefully as an opportunity to demonstrate flow, to demonstrate supply, and thus increase yours. Never hold back. You're the one you're holding back from. If you don't pay a bill, you're not paying yourself, so your income will be slower in coming in. The basic principle here, of course, is oneness. The spiritual principle of tithing is oneness. So, I mean, you can infinitely afford to give, and you can't afford not to. Outpouring leads to the return. The basic principle is oneness. You're helping yourself through giving, serving, and sharing, and there is no one else to give to. That is the basis of supply. I will print some of these. I didn't have enough paper, or I would print these. I printed these tonight. I printed the transcript and didn't have enough paper left to print all these. I was in a state of lack. I should have just printed them and seen if the paper multiplied, but it didn't occur to me. I should have gone for a loaves and fishes demonstration, but it didn't. Frankly, it didn't occur to me. Too late now. But I will have these for you next week. The point is to work on yourself on getting into this state of consciousness, and you do it not by suddenly being there. What you do is you work on it. Maybe you can suddenly be there. For me, that wasn't the case. When I quit the job last July, I was delighted to discover I was there. I had thought I was, but I didn't know until I was on the line. But you can get there by practicing. You can work at sharing more. You can work at giving more. You can work at being in the consciousness more. You can work at being more spontaneous. You can work at saying more yes, just whenever you can. Whenever you can afford to take the risk of giving or sharing or saying yes or doing that, then you can do so. And you learn the principles which must work. And as you do this more, your capacity to do it more grows, and your presence in the flow of supply grows, and this will develop. And so you go inside and you feel what it is you're supposed to do, and feel whether or not you trust that you can do it. And if you think you possibly can, you go for it. What can happen? Let's do the 7th recognition exercise. Are people doing these recognition exercises? Are people having fun with them and working on them and keeping them in your consciousness every day and trying to understand what they mean and grinding? This is the recognition. This word recognition, I recognize, and recognize and discern are the same word. These are exercises in spiritual discernment. These are exercises that are specifically designed to take you to where you have discernment of supply, of oneness. The 7th one is, I recognize that I must practice getting into the lap until I can stay there at will and until I receive my assurance that there is nothing that needs to be done. Now, getting into the lap means going into the silence. When you practice the awareness exercise and you become aware of the silence and you then consciously enter that silence, when you practice this enough, there is a feeling, there is a knowing that everything is just exactly right, that I don't have to do anything. And it really is a tangible, there is a feeling, you're safe, you know that I don't have to do anything. And it's not an intellectual state, it's not a concept or anything, it's a knowing. And that's being in the lap. And that's the end result of the awareness exercises, practicing the awareness exercises. And that's the goal. And that is the oneness that, I don't have to do anything, is supply, is grace, is harmony, is healing, is it all. So we're doing 2 things here. The awareness exercise is one approach to it. We're doing 3 things. The awareness exercise is the practice to achieve the meditative's ability to sit in silence. The recognition exercises are one practiced vehicle to crack the intellect and quiet the intellect, and all the other class material that we're doing is another way of reconditioning the intellect. So that's what this is all about. Now we'll do healing next week if it turns out that we have a healing class. It's not here yet. But we will see what we will do next week. If not, we'll move on to the principles because they're here.
Can you read the recognition exercise again?
There are copies of them.
I have a question. I've been going back to my Course in Miracles book and reading it and finding a lot of obviously similarities. And one of the things that stuck out, I guess just to clarify that, it says recognize that I don't have to do anything. That's like in that moment when you're in the silence, like the release, right? But it doesn't mean that you don't have to practice, God consciousness and practice spiritual giving and when you're not in that place, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And Course in Miracles might use the word.
The answer again is 3D or 4D. When I am in that consciousness, then I don't need to practice. I don't need to do sadhana. I don't need to do spiritual disciplines of any sort. I don't need to do anything when I'm in the consciousness. It is done. I don't need to do anything.
Right.
When I am not in that consciousness, then if I'm confronted with something, I either go into that consciousness, in which case I don't have to do anything, or if I have not yet developed the capability of doing that, then I need to do the spiritual disciplines, do the practice, do the training, do all that sort of thing. So these are things that we need to have to develop the ability to attain that consciousness. And that's what spiritual discipline and spiritual practice is all about, is developing the tool. It's a muscle. It's a faculty. It's a sense.
So I guess my question is, when I did my master's course, before they taught you any of the tools that they taught, they always said, I recognize that the person before me has all the necessary capabilities to come to all their own conclusions, which I thought was really great. But then it goes into the tool. Do you know what I mean? And it seems like the same thing. Like, what if you're working with someone in the program and, they're lost with whatever's going on, they're consumed by the situation or whatever, and they're coming to you and they're asking you for assistance on it. And if I need do nothing.
Well, if you're an AA sponsor, then you talk steps with them. Mm-hmm. If you're a spiritual teacher, you can perhaps just go into the silence, into the state of knowing you need to do nothing, and lift them to the point where they know that too.
Really?
Yes.
Have you had experiences like that?
I have been lifted there many times by
but
people.
Even with people maybe who haven't done any of this mental work,
I said I have been lifted by people like that often. People who are totally immersed. Mm-hmm. If your consciousness is high enough, yes, you can lift them there. Joel could do that trivially. A really good infinite way teacher will lift the class to the place where they can see it. I have been taken many times by Herb Fitch. Going to a class and with Herb Fitch, he would not teach you the awareness exercise. He would take you there and show you. He would say, sitting in the lap is, and the room would get quiet and the bottom would drop out. Oh my God, that's the sign, Yes, consciousness can do that, but we have to recognize where we're at and what our capabilities are. And
so just be open to that.
Sure.
Okay.
And one of the functions of the Christ is comforting. I mean, we don't have to take everybody that comes to us and elevate them or fix their problems or fix anything, you know. I mean, one of the functions of the Christ is to hug them. That's a good answer too. Just hug them and tell them everything's okay. I mean, that consciousness within you will know what to do if you're listening to it, and it may be to teach, and it may be to elevate, and it may be to comfort, and it may be to do any one of a number of things. It may be an instantaneous healing on the spot when your consciousness is there.
Wow.
I mean, it could be a lifting of the alcoholism in that moment.
Right.
There's no reason it couldn't be. Let's get quiet for a few minutes.